We are Heather and Paul Christie.
And for over 12 years, we've worked with executives and entrepreneurs to accelerate change in every aspect of their business.
Because we are in the fastest paced business environment that anyone has ever seen before.
So join us for the Evolve to Win show.
Hey, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're with us today because we're going to do something fun where I'm going to debrief Paul on what we call a DISC assessment. And this is something that we do for our clients all the time, whether we're just evaluating one person or a leadership team or a full team. We help people understand more about their strengths and their limitations by having them take an assessment, which produces a report. In this session, I'm going to do something that's sort of a blended version of two different services that we offer, just for purposes of keeping it concise for you and pulling some real value out for the listeners. So we do two different things. One thing we do is a full debrief. And what that looks like is it would look just like this, where Paul and I are together on Zoom, and I would pull up a copy of the report and we'd go through, and we'd spend about an hour together, and we would do a deep dive. And I'd ask Paul a lot of questions, and I'd tell him what I see. And I'd really help him understand what his assessment tells us. Now, what's really interesting is a lot of people, probably 50 to 60% of you listening, have had some sort of instrument like this before. You've either taken a disc, or maybe you've seen it in the form of colors, red, yellow, green, and blue, maybe birds or animals. So there are a lot of different variations of this assessment. One thing I'll warn you about, be very, very careful about the assessments you take. Sometimes you take it on Facebook and they tell you what character you're like. Not all assessments are validated. So be very careful that if you're taking an assessment, you're taking a validated assessment so that you know that the results are actually real, because it can do more harm than good if you get the wrong results. So anyway, one part that we can do is the debrief, and that's a 1 hour full-blown deep dive session. We're not going to do that today. That takes too long. The other thing we do is what we call a rapid review. And I would do that without the client on the line. I would just record a quick version, usually 5 to 7 minutes, where I just go over the assessment very quickly and say, okay, here are the highlights. Here's what this means for you. Now, regardless, having some sort of review by a certified DISC or driving forces, depending on what assessment you're doing, but a certified practitioner, I believe that that provides, I don't just believe, I know that that provides so much more value. Paul likes to call it the 90-10 rule, which there's really no name for that. But he says that about 10% of the value you would get from reviewing your report, 90% of the value you get from working with a certified practitioner who can tell you what you're reading in your report. Because we all do it differently. Sometimes people will just kind of glance at what's in there and read the first couple of pages, get a good laugh, and show it to someone else. And then there are other people who will kind of comb through it and pour into it. But the reality is most people will not fully understand the value of the written report. So, Paul, if you're ready, we're just going to dive in, and I'm going to give you somewhere between 5 and 7 minutes about who you are.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. I'm sharing my screen. So if you happen to be listening to this and not watching, you can always go to our YouTube channel so that you can actually see the screen that I'm showing as I take Paul through his assessment. So Paul, the first thing that you see, these are your DISC graphs, and DISC is observable human behavior. So I'm going to help you read this and tell you how you show up for the world.
So this is how I take action, right?
It's how you take action. It's how you show up. It's what you do. It's what others see of you.
Got it. Okay.
Now, there's two different graphs. The one on the right-hand side is the natural style graph, and what we say is that's the real you. That's who you are when no one's looking. Mm-hmm. The adapted style is how you believe you need to adapt your behavior to be successful at work. So what's really cool about this particular instrument, some DISCs or other 4-part assessments only give you one graph, but people say, wait, I'm very different at work than I am at home. So that's why this is valuable. And Paul, I see that you're a little bit different at home than you are at work. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Okay. So let's take a look at this. This 50% line we call the energy line. I'm going to go quickly through each of these 4 factors and tell you what they mean in general and what they mean for you. First is the dominance factor. This is, Paul, how you deal with problems and challenges. The higher the dominance, the more direct, decisive, demanding you are. That's someone who's assertive, aggressive, results-oriented. They deal with problems and challenges very directly and very quickly. The lower the dominance score, that is someone who does not like to deal with problems and challenges directly. So you're at a 15 out of 100. And that says to me that you would much prefer that problems and challenges didn't exist, or you wish that someone else would handle them for you. Is this true?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good thing I've got some of that for both of us. I got enough for everybody. All right. The next one is the influence factor. And you can see that's just above the energy line for you, which means it's at play. And for you, what that says is you've got this part of your behavioral style that is influential. It's how you influence others, and you influence through people, through interacting with other people. So at a 56, you don't have a really, really strong influence style, but you definitely have that side of you that's outgoing, fun, optimistic, right? And here's what people who know you well would say: if you add a glass of wine or two, that probably shoots away closer to 100.
Yeah, the I is much more situational for me in a lot of cases. Yeah,
for sure. All right, good. So the S behavioral style, this is where you shine. This is your style. And you have 88% S, which is the supporter style. And that's how you deal with the pace in your environment. And the answer here is you like it slow and steady in your environment. You like for people to go your pace, which is not a very rapid pace. Am I right about that?
That's right.
Okay. So you're also, this style is a people style as well. So how you deal with people, you're someone who has a whole lot of patience. You're someone who is laid back and easygoing and really chill. Mm-hmm. And so what's great about this S style, it's a supporter style, you're also someone who really, really at work, and especially at work with a 92, you really love to support people at work. You love to be that person in the background supporting somebody who's driving. Is that right?
I do. I like this to support, as well as I like consistent systems and procedures.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you definitely like consistency. And I know, here's the other thing about this high S behavioral style, you like to handle things one thing at a time.
That's
right. You do not like multitasking. If you are given a whole list of things, you will just stop, because that's not how you do it.
Yeah. So in our meetings, I like when I'll ask you, what are the top 3 things that we need to accomplish today, so that I can just work on those top 3 things.
Yeah, so I get a lot more from Paul in terms of productivity when he's laser focused versus handing him a bunch of things. Okay, good. And then with the C behavioral style, you have C at 64%, so that's also at play for you. And that's how you deal with other people's rules, processes, and procedures. And the answer is you pay attention to them. You have high standards, and you follow the rules, and you wish other people would follow the rules as well. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I do look for the rules, and when I see people breaking rules, it'll sometimes make me uncomfortable, depending on the situation, because I'll break rules as well. But in general, it really makes me uncomfortable to see people breaking rules.
Okay, got it. So that is a brief overview of the 4 different behavioral styles. So Paul, at your core, you are slower paced. Both the S and the C tend to be slower paced, whereas the I and the D are faster paced. You have 2 factors above the energy line that are people factors, both the I and the S. And then the C style, that's a task orientation. If D is get it done now, C is get it done right. So your interest when it comes to doing things is more along the lines of let's make sure it's accurate and right and precise versus done, right? Because the D is like, let's just get it done.
Yeah, so when you say the energy line, what does that exactly mean?
So the energy line at 50%, that's the average out of 100%. So anything that's above that energy line is what we say is at play. But it's really important to know that there's no good or bad, there's no right or wrong. This is just a snapshot of you and who you are, and it's perfect. The value here is really understanding the different aspects of you so that you can tap into your strengths in each of these areas, because every one of these factors Whether it's above the energy line or below just means something different. But there are strengths everywhere, but there's also accompanying limitations. So it's really valuable to know. So as an example, mad strengths for the S behavioral style, which is yours, is the fact that you are patient. You tend to be a great listener. You're very laid back and you're so supportive of your team members. One of your potential limitations is you don't share things with people. You keep all your emotions inside. And so we don't know if you're having a great day or a bad day. And we don't know if something is bothering you because you're not likely to share it directly. And so sometimes that leads us to question, whether we don't know how you're really feeling, so we can't change something if it's not working for you. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, that's true. And should I only be looking at the behavioral styles that are above the line, the energy line, or is the ones below important as well?
That's a great question. It's the furthest from the energy line that gives the strength. And so whether it's above or below, you want to pay attention to both, absolutely. In your case, the S is first because it's the furthest from the energy line in terms of strength. The D, the low D, would be your second most dominant factor. That's below the energy line, but at a 15, that's really, really strong for you. Mm-hmm. So, your style, and by the way, high S, low D just goes so well together. And again, it gives you that really patient pace, but it also means that you're not going to deal with things very directly. So one area where you could adapt is you could learn to be more direct in your communication, especially when it comes to dealing with problems or challenges where you may perceive that there's some level of conflict.
Got it.
Okay. Let's take a look at your adapted graph. This is how you believe you need to adapt your style to be really successful in your role. And there's really only one adaptation that we see, and it's not that significant. But your I goes from a 56 down to a 42. So it is at play in your natural style, and you reduce that energy just a little bit at work. And so I would just ask you, Paul, why do you think at work you bring down that interactive nature that you have naturally?
Yeah, in my job role right now, I just don't need to interact with as many people on a daily basis right now. So for me, it's easier to increase the C, increasing the C, analyzing process and procedure systems. I need that more than I need the interaction with people, because I just don't spend as much time with people right now.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, the other reason that Paul may be adapting just a little bit, increasing that C and having even more S, is because we work so closely together and I don't have much S or C to speak of. So we need someone to do it, and you're the one who takes that for the team. So it works out great, actually. And you may notice this about your team, is that the people who you work most closely with, it's great when they have the opposite style from you, because it really helps to bring their strengths to the table if you don't have them naturally. So Paul, we see that your dominance factor drops just a little bit, your influence factor drops a bit, and your S is about the same, goes up a little bit, and your C goes up by just a little bit. So the biggest change we see is you take some of that outgoing, faster paced energy. And so at work, both the S and the C, by the way, are slower paced, and whereas the D and the I are faster paced. So do you agree with that, Paul, that you typically like to go a slower pace?
Yeah, absolutely. I have to, because you are running so hard, so fast. I need to slow this down a little bit just to keep track of a lot of what's going on in our business.
Yeah. Okay, great. I'm going to take you through just a couple of other pages that we've pulled from this report. Now, this report that we did here is actually, it's over 50 pages, but I'm just going to show you a couple of pages here that I think are really powerful. This is your behavioral hierarchy. So everything we just talked about with that bar graph called DISC, this is how DISC shows up in the real world. These are the 12 most commonly encountered behaviors in the workplace. And what you're going to see, Paul, is that we all do these differently, but this is going to actually show you where you stand compared with what I like to call the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. So your scores are over here on the right-hand side, and they're also represented with the blue bar graph. you're being compared with this red line, which represents 68% of the population. So you see this white line in the middle, that's the mean score. And then you've got one standard deviation above, one standard deviation below, which is a really fancy scientific way for saying about 7 out of 10 people, or 68% of the population, will fall within this red area. So why is this valuable to know? Well, can you imagine finding out for the first time how you behave compared with the rest of the world? How much strength you have in a certain behavior compared with others. Paul is someone who's very consistent. He's people-oriented. He's customer-oriented. He's a policy follower. He's persistent. He has an organized workplace, and he is into analysis. Now, each one of these behaviors actually has a definition to it, right? So it's really important to understand the definition. And you see when you're really on the high end or just outside of where that red line is, you are going to be someone who's predictable in repetitive situations. Whereas you may work with someone who is not at all consistent, likes to do things differently every single time, and that should drive you crazy. So that's me. That's exactly me, and I drive you crazy. And you, me too, which is great because we can appreciate that about each other and know when we can count on each other and tap into those strengths. But when you don't know that about each other, it can just drive you crazy. So somebody who does it differently all the time, Paul, when you're sitting up here at an 82 and you've got someone who's just constantly reinventing the wheel and you never know what to expect from them, that's a little maddening, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, on the other hand, when you look down at these lower levels, like your urgency is at a 13. I think mine's somewhere around a 96. So you can imagine two people who have a completely different sense of urgency. One is constantly going to be saying, like, you're constantly going to be saying, slow down. You're moving too fast. You're not analyzing or thinking it through. Somebody who's highly urgent is going to look at you and say, let's go. Let's get into action. Make a decision. Let's go. So it's just really important to know where you fall. And again, when you're way outside of this red line, which represents 68% of the people, versatility, frequent change. So think about that. If somebody who you work with is constantly making changes and adapting and shifting between tasks, that can be a real stressor for you, right? So this is a great way, just this one chart, to really understand what it is about others, for you it's me, that drives you nuts and why. I also want to show you this perceptions page, which is really powerful. This page is showing me how you see yourself, right?
Yes.
Versus how others see you under moderate or extreme stress. Now, this in and of itself is probably a great separate podcast topic we should consider going into, because here's what we know. When we're under stress, we actually lose access to the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is our thinking, rational brain, decision-making brain. Well, if you don't have access to it, you're not actually able to behave the way you intend to behave. So instead, it comes out differently and usually not as well. So none of us like how we look in moderate or extreme stress. But while Paul is thinking that he's coming across as being a good-natured team player and a great listener, he actually can show up as someone who's non-demonstrative, unconcerned, hesitant, detached, stubborn, insensitive. And I can actually attest to this, that this happens. But here's what's really interesting. Paul never intends to show up that way. It's not what he wants to display at all, because of course he's a very supportive person. But when he's stressed out, that's how it looks. So I want you to think about next time you're in a situation and someone is behaving in your mind badly, chances are really good that they're just stressed out. And rather than identifying that as, oh my gosh, you're stressed out, how can I support you? We usually react to that and we go into our own stressor mode, right? And mine is less than pleasant as well. We all have a less than pleasant stressed out mode. There are strengths and weaknesses here that are pointed out to you so specifically. And as I said, every one of us has really incredible strengths. This is the power of this assessment. Most people who have done an assessment have never actually had a debrief. They've never had somebody who is a certified practitioner who really understands this and can help them know how to tap into their strengths. Once you really study these and understand them, you can start to get way more intentional about being strength-based, because what happens all the time is we get pulled over into our weaknesses. At any time you're in your weakness, you're not in your strength zone. So awareness is really powerful here. Energizers and stressors. When you are in your energizers, everything is flowing and you're at the top of your game. But when you are surrounded by a stressor, that gets really, really difficult for you. So it's important for you to understand what those stressors are so that you don't fall into that trap, get to the point where it's in your environment, it's really sucking the energy out of you. When you create your environment to be filled with energizers, you are going to get a lot more productivity out of yourself as well. So that takes us to the end of your rapid review of your DISC behavioral style. And you got to see a little bit about who you are naturally versus how you behave at work. And for those of you listening, hopefully you had some similarities that you found with Paul, or maybe you saw some real differences, but one way or another, it may have highlighted for you some of the areas of potential frustration that you have with other people at the office as you think about those 12 behaviors that we see most often in the workplace. So next session, Paul, we're going to go through and look at your driving forces, and we're going to find out why you do what you do. If you have not connected with us yet, please go to our LinkedIn page or to our website at heatherchristie.com, and you can connect with us there. Have an awesome day. Thanks for joining in today.
Bye now.